Hello, today is April 7th, 2021 at 6:18 p.m. My name is Heidi Mejia Porta. I'm interviewing Zaira Sanchez, who is a local community organizer for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas, Austin. Please know, Zaira, that this recorded interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin and the Brown University Library's digital repository. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's a topic you want to talk about, please bring it up and we can discuss it. Participation in the study is completely voluntary and you are free to withdraw from the interview at any time. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting to participate in this interview. I will ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. Voces of a Pandemic wishes to archive your interview, along with any other photographs and other documentation that you wish to contribute at the Benson Library at UT Austin and Brown University's digital repository. The Voces Oral History Project will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials that you choose to donate. So we'll start with question 1. Do you give the Voces of a Pandemic project consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library and Brown University Library's digital repository?
I agree.
Do you grant the Voces of a Pandemic project copyright over the interview and any material that you choose to provide?
I agree.
Do you agree to allow Voces of a Pandemic to post this interview on the internet via the Voces Oral History Center's YouTube channel where it may be viewed by the public?
I agree.
Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file to researchers at the Benson Library?
I agree.
On occasion, the Voces Oral History Center receives requests from journalists who wish to contact individuals who have participated as narrators in oral history interviews. The Voces Oral History Center only responds to reputable news outlets. Do you give consent for Voces to share your phone number or email with journalists that are interested in your story?
I agree.
Okay, thank you, Zaira, for agreeing to the verbal informed consent. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Just with the first question, if you can start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living.
Okay. So I'm Zaira Sanchez. I'm the Emergency Relief Coordinator for the United Farm Workers Foundation. And we are covering the Pacific Northwest. A lot of what the work we do is focused on providing relief for farm workers during the pandemic. That's why our jobs got started. So we've been providing PPE for farm workers when the pandemic first hit. For example, we provided over 90,000 masks just over like 4 months. And then we've also been doing a lot of educating our community on what COVID is and how to protect themselves. We've been informing workers of their rights with new laws that came into place with COVID. We've also been doing a lot of outreach and informing our communities around the vaccine now that it's available. And then just other advocacy work around immigration policy as well as just workers' rights and protections.
Just pause real quick. Is it recording? I totally forgot.
It is.
Okay, cool. That would have been bad. So can you tell me just a little bit about what your experiences have been with COVID-19, like personally?
Just personally, like in my own personal life,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
work. Okay. My experiences with COVID have been quite the journey. Like when it first started, I remember when I found out about like COVID and how it was coming, like to a community near you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing the numbers and hearing how bad it was going to be, and it sounded very, very extreme and scary. Like right away, I felt a sense of panic because my boss at the time, I was working with somewhere else, had said like, you all need to be protected because we were all serving like hard to reach communities. So she did a great job of making sure that we were safe, right? She said, you all need to quarantine for the next 2 weeks. And it was just like, okay, like I have to listen to my boss. And I thought that maybe like 2 weeks after that, like would be good. But next thing I knew, like July was like the next deadline that we were waiting for. And then that was a joke. And yeah, like we just saw the numbers of positive COVID cases increase in our county every day. You started hearing about people getting hospitalized, how hospitals were almost at like max capacity. So where would we send people next? And then you started hearing about family and friends passing away. And when you start hearing about like people next to you, right? Like that's where it feels really bad, right? Because that's your community and like they're just passing away all of a sudden. And like knowing about the losses too, like you can't grieve. You can't grieve in the way that is necessary to really process that loss. And that has been really disturbing to see, right? Like you get invited to remember someone and then you have to contemplate like, do I go? Do I not? How do I pay my condolences to this family who can't even themselves enter this space to mourn, right? So that's been really hard. And then, I mean, fast forward to December of 2020, I was like, wow, I think I'm going to make it through 2020 without getting COVID. And the week of Christmas, my grandma, who I live with, tested positive for COVID. And so right away, panic, you know, am I going to get it? Like, I live with her, we share everything. And thankfully, I managed to not get it. So I did survive 2020 without getting COVID. But it was, I think overall, just like the emotions have been a roller coaster. But thankfully, I've been okay. I've had many scares, but I'm okay so far.
Yeah, that's definitely a reality for a lot of people, I feel like, in Umatilla County. How would you say that it's affected your community? You know, like what are you seeing? Because like initially, I feel like in Umatilla County, there was like a lot of people who may have said like, you know, like culturally Latinx folks are really not, like are really kind of disregarding the quarantine. So, you know, have you sensed that that's true? Like, you know, what have you seen?
Yeah. At the beginning, honestly, I did see that folks weren't taking it as seriously. And when I say that, I don't mean like specific people, I mean the whole community. People were just in denial. And like I said, it wasn't until you saw the numbers rising and you started losing people that you realize, oh, this is real. We got to take it seriously. So, I mean, now I think things have gotten better. Like, honestly, it feels like two extremes. Like, it feels like I just remember the beginning where folks were in denial and then people started getting sick and people got silent. Maybe that's what it was because they didn't want to admit, oh, this is real. And now where our communities are slowly getting more and more vaccinated, now it's more so the talk of like, am I going to get it? When am I going to get it? And just checking in, like, did you get it yet? What was your experience like? So we're normalizing what it means to get vaccinated and how that's going to impact our communities. So,
yeah. In terms of the vaccine, what would you say are like maybe some barriers that exist in Umatilla County for the Latinx community?
I haven't seen targeted events for the Latinx community, like promoted just for Spanish speakers or things like that. Events that are culturally relevant, right? Like appropriate to meet the needs of the Latinx community, right? For folks to feel safe, to feel welcome, to feel like they're allowed to be there, to feel like it's something they can even do, right? Like setting up the events at hours where our people can pull up, really emphasizing that no insurance is needed, there's going to be no cost, all of those things. Like, I feel like our people, like when I speak about the Latinx community, there is hesitancy. It's more, I would call it more so just doubts, right? Like, how is this going to affect my day tomorrow after I get it or hours later, right? And so I think that if we could just reduce all those barriers, right, more folks will start getting vaccinated. But they themselves put the excuse, right, of like, well, I can't afford to miss a day of work. So until it's a day and time that works for me, I'm going to go. Or what else? Well, I went to the event, but there was FEMA people there in these uniforms. And so I was like, what's that about? I'm driving away because they're scary looking. Those are different things that are happening. And so I think that if we could reduce all those things and just host events that are gonna make our gente show up, then we're more likely to get vaccinated, right? Like our gente are very community focused, right?
Mhm.
So if we just do a better job of making things more community based, they're more likely to show up.
Yeah, for sure. And just to like backtrack a little, to go back to like your personal experiences, how would you say that it's different going out in like a COVID-19 world versus like a pre-COVID world?
I mean, I think every now, at least once a month, I'm reminiscing on like when I could go out. I'm someone that likes to go out and socialize and drink and hang out with my friends and dance, especially dancing. I miss dancing a lot. Um, and once we started taking like the pandemic seriously, right? People started getting creative about like hosting online events and stuff like that. And I remember at the beginning, like we were doing a good job of like hosting friend Zoom meetings and playing house party and FaceTiming and like doing social media challenges, like where you do push up and tag someone, go do push ups too, or take a shot. There was all these different things at the beginning. And I feel like it lasted a month and then people got over it. And like, I can't remember the last time I used house party. Now I try to be in, like, not in front of a screen at all, right? I'm burnt out from being on the screen. So like, that's where I do my work now, you know? And then people want to FaceTime me and stuff. I'm like, ugh. And I feel like my social media use has gone down too because I just don't want to be in front of a screen. I want to be outside or with my dog or talking to my family in person. Um, but I think that's kind of how things have changed for me.
Yeah, have you chosen to interact with people outside of like your immediate household, like, and not maybe like in a professional setting?
Yeah. I was really strict with myself at the beginning, right? Because it just was, things were so out of order and like scary. Um, but you know, I caved. There was times where I caved. I caved in July, and I made poor choices in terms of going out and yeah, like not being socially distant with friends and stuff. But thankfully, we were all okay. Um, but immediate regret, right? Like the next day, immediate regret. Like that was a poor decision. We're being inconsiderate. We're being ignorant. Like, what if we got someone sick, kind of thing? Because you just never know, right? You never know who's asymptomatic. Um, and I think again in like November, December, I made another poor choice. I caved again. Um, and again, immediate regret. And even like, I feel like I started psyching myself out, feeling like I had symptoms. So I like isolated and all this stuff. And then I went and got tested and I was fine. Um, so like you really do start to anything, right? Like if you have allergies, oh my gosh, it's COVID. I don't know how many times I worried that I had COVID, right? And it was just like anxiety induced symptoms. Um, but I am vaccinated now. I have both vaccines. I got the Moderna. Um, I feel like I'm able to go to spaces more confidently. Like there were certain people that I definitely would avoid, right? Like my grandparents that are almost 100 years old. I'm grateful to have them alive still. And when you're 100 years old almost, right? Like interaction with your family is so important. So it was heartbreaking to like have to avoid them, right? It's a blessing to have them alive and you want to spend as much time as you can with them. Once a week visit, you know. And so there was a while where I couldn't go around, you know, I just could call, but they're also hard of hearing, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, do you run the risk of bringing COVID into someone's home, or do you run the risk of letting them die of sadness because no one's allowed to visit them anymore? Um, So that was hard, but thankfully we all survived that, and they're vaccinated too now. So we're able to visit more confidently, right? And you still have to be precautious though. You still have to wear your mask. You still have to be sanitizing and just being mindful of that, right? And thankfully it's more normal now. But at first, like a lot of it was just normalizing that. Like for whatever reason, it was weird to wear a mask, even though it was normal, right? Like there's certain folks that just really refuse to accept it. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, speaking of masks, like you seem to be a proponent of it. Why do you think that there was, specifically in Umatilla County, like such a big pushback on wearing face coverings in general?
People made it political. It was a statement, and it was just it was. I don't have words for it. Like people were in denial and wanting to let it be clear, right, that they stood on a certain side of the issue, you know. And I think that had to do with the president at the time, right, and his messaging that he was giving folks about COVID and how it wasn't real, and here's what you should do if you do get it, kind of thing. Like all the misinformation that he was putting out there to his followers, right, they were so quick to grab it and take it to a whole nother level of conspiracy and just ignorance. And unfortunately, right, in communities like small rural communities, right, where folks don't have as much access to education, I don't know what the issue is. um, they just carry that, right? And so I don't know. I was like, you know what? Just put on masks with your political stance on the mask, and we know where you stand, dude. Just wear the mask.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, well, speaking of like the mask and like some changes that we've made, like basically everything has really gone online. So like, how do you think it has changed like the way in which our community members are receiving education, like the kids, but also parents? Like, is it making it more accessible? Is it presenting new barriers in terms of like navigating technology?
Excuse me. Yeah. So I think both sides, right? Like I really feel for kids. I worry about a lot of the kids that school was like their safe haven, right? That's really scary to think of. Like I don't even like getting like going there because like that's really scary to think of. Um, and then I mean not just safe haven, but also like the kids that like that's their opportunity to socialize, right? Like that's the only place they're able to see their friends and stuff like that. Um, or those are the kids that that's like the only place they can get a decent meal, you know, like that. All those things at the beginning were like right away what you worried about. um, I think communities did the best they could to create opportunities for folks to have access to hotspots and the technology needed to continue their classes online. But some home environments just are not a learning space, right? So it's really scary to think about, yeah, just the group of kids that just unfortunately aren't going to be up to par with other students that did have the appropriate setting to learn, right? So it's really scary to think of, yeah, just where kids are going to be at there. Um, and then also just like in those social skills too, right? Like, what is this generation of kids that like missed out on appropriate socializing? Like, what's going to lead the por si, right? We already have just disturbing things happening every now and then, right? More often. And it's due to like the whole issue of nature versus nurture, right? So how is that going to impact this generation of kids, right? um but anyway, that's a whole nother rant. Another, I think there are positives to like transitioning to an online world. um for folks that can and just haven't done it yet, right? It's creating a need to just try it out, right? Learn how to navigate Zoom, learn how to do, learn how to like participate in webinars and stuff like that. Like for the work that I do, right? we have all of these different webinars and stuff, informational sessions. Like we've continued to do the outreach that usually was in like community venues or at parks and things like we'd meet in person, right? But now we've had to switch to online, and farm workers have learned how to do it. Like so many farm workers have learned how to navigate Zoom. I think that's just so cool, right? Like that's worth celebrating. And so it just touches on that si se puede attitude, right? Like sometimes we do have to face a challenge in order to try something new, right? So that is the one positive of that. I mean, I've done a lot of things myself. I really don't like using technology. But I've had to, right, in order to do the work. I probably wouldn't have pushed myself to do the things that I've done, right, because there just wasn't a need, right? And I think in the workplaces too, you know, I remember years ago, right, wanting to be able to work from home, and it was like a no, absolute no, that's impossible. But now all of a sudden, so many employers are saying, "Oh yeah, work from home," right?
Yeah.
So I'm interested too to see like moving forward, right? Once we can go back to working in our offices and stuff, how lenient employers will be and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just amazing how much more things can all of a sudden get done when it's the only method to do it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you touched a little bit on like schools and that home environment for students.
Mhm.
Can you think of like other ways that schools tried to alleviate some of those hardships? So like they
Mhm.
passed out hotspots, but like were they running like food programs,
Yeah.
stuff like that?
Yeah. One of the first things that I heard was being done was they were providing like school breakfasts and lunches, I think. And they started out just like in general spots, but slowly I think more and more people started expressing the need. And so they expanded. And so I know that that was being done to meet that need. I don't know about other ones, honestly. Those were like the two that I heard: the food and then the technology.
Mm. Okay, so we're gonna move into a little bit more about like the healthcare kind of aspect.
Okay.
So what like concerns were coming up about healthcare, like as a result of COVID? Like what, for our county, but also like for Hermiston?
Um, Healthcare in terms of like just continuing to for your regular or like just in general.
Like everything, yeah.
Okay. Well, I know right away, like I said in the beginning, there was concerns about capacity, right? Like being able to fit all the people that were getting sick. Um, and yeah, like I don't know how many times I was hearing comments of like they're gonna start having to send people over to Washington or to Idaho. Um, and that was scary, right? Because I was looking at the map and saying, well, their numbers are horrible too. So I don't know where they're gonna send them to. Um, but I think it did spark a reaction in people to do the best that they could to like not be going to unnecessary appointments, right? I don't know. I noticed that there was folks saying that like, well, I can't go right now because you just can't. Um, and I know, like for example, my grandma. I honestly don't have many healthcare needs. Well, I probably do, but like I can put them off, right? Um, but with my grandma, who she's older, she's like in her late 60s, the one that I live with, she has regular appointments, right? She's an older woman, she's got more needs, and she started saying, well, I shouldn't go right now. And it was because she was afraid that she was going to pick up something. She was afraid to pick up COVID, so she stopped going to her regular appointments. And then she didn't feel comfortable doing like the online check-in stuff. So those were some of the things I noticed with healthcare. But I mean, you think about it, right? And you worry like other people who maybe had higher needs and couldn't go or felt like they couldn't go. And so how that affected them. I'm being pretty general, but like I'm thinking about mental health, right? That's a big one where those added stressors and how it was affecting people and their ability to go see their counselors or their therapist or their psychologist or their psychiatrist to make sure that they're okay. Um, so that's all I could think of for healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. And And you talked a little bit about the mental health impact.
Mhm.
How have you seen that like manifesting, like in yourself, in your family, in the community?
Mhm. Um, I'm trying to think of how to respond to the question. I know that like for myself, thankfully, like I am in a place where I have felt mentally stable. Um, I've had my own struggles with like anxiety in the past, like to a point that I was imbalanced, right? So there was a point in my life where I had to take medication to help control that and like just get through the day, right? But thankfully, like I'm stable now. And so I was worried of how it was gonna impact me, right? But thankfully, I already had like the tools, thanks to therapy and stuff, to be able to control that and under like feel in my body, feel in my mind, feel in my heart when something was off and what I needed to do to be okay. That's not the case for a lot of people, right? Like that takes a lot of work and awareness. And unfortunately, I've seen like close friends just change completely, right? And it's understandable. And there's really nothing you could do for them. I know that you could talk to them, you can express your concerns, you could talk to family members and friends, and even community organizations. But there's just so many extra stressors. And again, when you don't have the outlets that you're used to distract yourself, um, like the mental health manifests itself, right? The issues manifest themselves. And so that's just really saddening and disheartening, right? Because I think the folks who rely on like distracting themselves socially are probably struggling a lot, right? For me, right, I've been able to turn to my fitness goals. I stopped exercising for a while, right, post college, and during this pandemic, I picked it up again. I've like been training, and I don't have the distraction of going out to the bars and drinking. So I've also seen how that impacts my health, right? Um, but not everyone has like that interest, right, in working out. Like I used to be an athlete, and so that's something that interests me. I was able to pick it up again, right? But yeah, it's really sad and scary. Like I said, again, with the kids, right? It's not just kids, the adults socialize too. So how are we all going to be after this? I don't know. Like once we get to socialize again, I'm scared. People aren't going to know how to act.
Yeah. So like you've talked about maybe like a deficiency in like a government response in providing resources.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like maybe some of the organizations or like churches or school districts that have kind of like tried to step up to the plate where things have been missing?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's sad to say, like I honestly haven't seen big efforts in Umatilla County of like the community responding. An article that I remember at the beginning of the pandemic was the commissioner blaming farm workers or like ag workers for not taking better care of themselves, like saying their living environments and like their group transportation to the work site, that's the issue, that's why they're all getting sick. And it was just like that's your response to the numbers of our community getting disproportionately impacted by COVID. You're blaming the community. And so that's really what I remember for Umatilla County. So I mean, maybe there's more. Maybe I'm not the right person to like be asking that question to share something positive. I'm sure there have been some efforts, but for me, as a Latina woman who lives in Umatilla County, who's educated, who has access to reading the newspapers, listening to the news, I consider myself to be informed of what's going on in my community. If I don't know, the folks who have it more challenging definitely don't know what's available, right? So I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, and you mentioned the disproportionate impact, And so in a recent report from the Umatilla County Health Department, we received the COVID statistics for the Hispanic community in 2020. And it said that 40% of the people who contracted COVID were Hispanic, although the fact that the Hispanic community only makes up 28% of the total population. So why do you think that we're seeing these jarring differences? Like obviously we're seeing blame being placed. Do you think there are like any other factors that are going into it?
I think about like the jobs that our gente, the Latinx community has, right? Frontline workers. Think about the lack of appropriate information that's being provided for our communities, right? So there is a lot of misinformation out there. And so like our communities aren't giving they aren't utilizing the proper source to funnel that information through. Sure, it exists. They've translated the documents and all those things, right? But maybe it's just not being shared in a way that's appropriate, right? Again, like utilizing community-based organizations or faith-based leaders that those communities, like the Latinx community, trusts and looks up to, because the city is in it, right? Like the way that, I mean, look at that doesn't represent who Latinx people are. So that's really important. What else? And I think just fear too. Like our people have been, they don't trust like the government. They don't trust a lot of agencies and stuff like that, right? And why? Some people just don't have legal status. Some people do, but they're still just afraid because of trauma, right? And then another thing is like our communities tend to be very home remedy type people, right? And so again, just being in denial, like, well, I'm feeling kind of sick, but I don't think it's COVID, right? It's just a cold, things like that. I know that there's people too who like test positive, know they have it, don't feel horrible. And so they're like, all right, cool, I have COVID, but I'm good. So I'm still gonna go do what I gotta do. I'm still gonna go to the store. I'm still gonna go hang out with my friends. Like, don't understand how that is problematic, right? So again, it's just, you can say the things, you could provide the information, but if it's just not presented in a way that makes sense to the person, they're not gonna fully understand it, right? And again, another thing with our community is sometimes out of respect, they just say yes. Like, I'm following what you're saying. I know what you're doing. But maybe they're nervous, right? Like it's not clicking what you're actually saying. So then they walk away and are like, wait, what did they say? What did that mean? And sometimes people are shy to ask questions. Like, again, just that's why it's so important to have culturally relevant and appropriate information, that it's provided in a way that makes sense to folks, because that's what happens.
Yeah. And it seems like there is information available, right? And it has become much more available as time has gone on, but there's clearly kind of a lack of resources. So like if you had a little bit more power in like how resources were distributed and things were handled, like how do you think you would kind of go about that?
I think I would make sure to, I mean, if I had the financial support, because that's one thing, like just I would want to invest in the communities in ways where the information was received appropriately, and it was being provided in a way that was just super normal, right? Like I think that sometimes it, like being able to get COVID tested or to get the vaccine should be as easy as like going and ordering something from McDonald's. I don't know, like it shouldn't have to be this whole thing where you call and make an appointment and sign in and provide your insurance and provide proof of who you are. Like there's just so many barriers, right? So it just needs to be more accessible. and just more normalized. Because again, like one of the big things, people just treat it as something like, so over there, it's not my turn. Like there's all these reasons as to why not me. But we need to make it more, we want to change the mindset to, no, I'm important. I need to be next. It's my turn. Give it to me now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and we've kind of focused a little bit more on like the local level. So what do you think of the state response? What do you think of the federal response? Because I feel like they're similar, but they're also kind of different in many ways.
mhm. Um, I mean, honestly, I've been happy with Governor Brown's response. I think that she's done a good job prioritizing groups, and there have been times where she surprises me too. And I think she's taken it very seriously. In Umatilla County, people have been very upset about how seriously she takes it, but I really see the benefit of that, and so I'm happy with that. I think that she's looked out for us. Nationally, it's it's just been unbelievable to see and hear about. I don't, like when I think about New York, right? Like I don't understand. Um, so I don't know. I can't really speak nationally on. I'm not fully informed, right? But just from what headlines and stuff, it's even scarier. Like especially like more populated cities, right? Like over here, we're more rural, and so it feels more manageable to me. I don't know. Like I was worrying a lot for like my friends in Portland and things like that, where just people are more populated.
Yeah, for sure. And so like the federal government has taken some steps. We've seen, I think it's 3 stimulus checks now, question mark. What are your thoughts on like the stimulus checks? Like, you know, is it enough? Should it have gone further? Should it have included a larger group of people?
Well, with the stimulus checks, I don't think they're enough. Um, I think that they're a joke. I was offended when I heard the numbers. And, you know, thankfully, I'm someone who is like financially stable. So right away, my thought was like, I don't want that check. Why are they sending me that check? I don't need it. Give it to someone who needs it, you know? Um, and, you know, my family was just kind of like, don't say that, just accept it. um, but yeah, like that was the thought, was just like, who can survive off of this measly $600 check? And again, that's my privilege, right? Like to me that seems impossible, but there are people who were like so ready for that check, and there was people who like that was more than they've ever had, you know what I mean? um so it's just, again, it's just really sad and disturbing to like to think about that, and like just how, yeah, for me to be able to say like I don't want that, I don't need that, like just keep it, that's a joke, um is really privileged, right? And just, yeah, there's people who are constantly calling and asking, hey, like when is it going to get here? Do I qualify? What do I have to do? Right? All those things. And the people who don't even qualify for it, who are the ones who need it the most. That's the sad thing. The people who need it the most aren't even eligible for it. Um, and, you know, thankfully there was efforts being done to respond to that need immediately, right? But the money would finish like that. And that, again, that's just really scary to see. So
Yeah, can you expand a little bit on the efforts that were made to kind of include those ineligible folks and like maybe why they were ineligible?
mm-hmm. So there was community effort to ensure that folks who didn't meet the requirements to receive the stimulus check um, got something, because obviously everyone is being impacted by COVID. Um, and so there was like state funds being put together, mutual aid funds, you know, the state ones were the biggest pools of money, right? But then other communities, like more local grassroots efforts, were done as well to help out how they could too. So I don't remember. I know of two like state relief funds that were being distributed to folks. I don't know if there's still more or where they're at. Honestly, I've kind of lost touch with that.
Yeah, and were these primarily for like undocumented folks, field workers, like who did you see receiving those funds?
Yeah, many of them were for undocumented folks and farm workers that were undocumented. I don't know who else would have fallen into the category. I think, like I said, anyone who just couldn't meet the requirements for the stimulus check, I think was eligible for those state funds.
Yeah. How would you, I think when we think about 2020, it's a very like high tensions year for a number of different reasons. So how would you say that like the politics played into it? I know you spoke a little bit about it when you talked about the masks, but like were there other ways that it also manifested?
The pandemic and 2020, like, can you say
Yeah,
more on
yeah.
the
So
question?
like particularly thinking about like the summer and a lot of the protests that were going on, but also as we moved into the fall, it was an election year, and so there were rallies and
Yeah.
just kind of like what you saw in our community.
Yeah, that was hard because there was that pressure of like needing. I mean, for me as an organizer and an activist, like there was a pressure of feeling the need to show up and be at these protests, but there was also like that daunting, like, should I be out there? Is this part of the problem too? Like, are people going to utilize these protests, these gatherings as like the BIPOC community is the one that's causing like all of this because they're out there gathered in large groups and stuff, yelling. So yeah, that was hard, and again, it was really hard to keep up with. I mean, like there was Black Lives Matter protests like multiple times every week, kind of thing. And again, like you get to that point where you're just like, I know I need to be here and I know I want to show up, but also like I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. Like I've been in front of the computer all day for my work, and now I feel the need to go out here and like be worried about being around people. And it was just really like, what's the word? I just felt very divided, right? I'm like, which way do I need, what's the right thing to do? Um, and then with the presidential election too, that was also really hard because oh, and then the census too. Oh my gosh. um, with both of those pieces specifically, you know, we're used to traditional like canvassing and stuff like that to make sure that our communities get the vote, right? Get out the vote, and then the census, making sure they got counted. So both of those things, I just feel like, especially the census, I feel like the outreach wasn't done as powerfully as it could have been, right? Thankfully, we have a new president, but I was worried like we're not able to get out into the community as much as we are used to ensure that our communities get the information and know, right? Um, so, and yeah, like just taking on more volunteer work and stuff to do that outreach during the pandemic. Like I wasn't trying to sign up and do it, right? Like I'm tired of sitting in front of the computer. So yeah, 2020 was a rough year.
Yeah, for sure. How would you say that your workplace, and I know that you were at a different grassroots organization prior to the one that you're at now, but like how would you say that your organization tried to strike that balance, right, of like still providing COVID pandemic information, but also dealing with the census and the election and trying to get people counted and trying to get people to vote.
Well, yeah, so the beginning of the year, I was with a different organization, and yeah, we immediately had to transition to doing everything online. Like I had just started working with them, and they had everything planned out for census outreach in a way that was going to be in person. And then they had been planning that stuff for months, and they just had to scratch the plan and rewrite a new plan that was completely remote. And so they did a really great job. I mean, considering how much time they had to like figure it out, right? Um, they did a good job making it happen, making it work for us, right? So we were provided with technology and all the things to continue the work just via phone and computer instead of canvassing in person. Um, and I mean, it created jobs for people too who were laid off and things like that. So that was cool to be able to hire folks and help out in that way. And then I switched jobs in the summer, and I mean, my job was emergency relief, right? And so we were just asked to provide, like, be precautious of our interactions, do like temperature checks every day, um, monitor our symptoms, and use best judgment if you started feeling something, right? But it was important work. We were giving PPE to farm workers, and it felt good knowing that we were giving those things to the community and just giving information too, because like is one of the communities that is most impacted by this.
Yeah, I think given the agricultural background of our rural community, we saw a really big impact with field workers, but also with people who are working in the, the manufacturing plants and the distribution plants.
Yeah.
So maybe what are some practices that you saw change as the pandemic went on, right? You mentioned temperature checks at your job, but like in these factories, like what were some things that you saw that were changing or maybe were not and were part of the problem?
Yeah. Yeah, you just reminded me. So there was at one of the factories in Washington, so just across the bridge, but we're a border town. So many of our folks that live here work over there, and vice versa. Many people who live over there work over here. And in one of the factories, I mean, this factory is operated, right, by BIPOC community. Everyone who works there is BIPOC. And so again, just the communities that are most impacted. We got word that 3 workers had passed away. And we were getting so many calls about being afraid to go to work. They didn't know their rights, right? They felt really unsafe, but they could not afford to lose their job. Please help us. Like, we don't know what to do, but this is not, we know that there's rules being broken here. And so that's an example, right, of new policies and rules being made by the government, but employers taking advantage of the communities that their employees, right, knowing that they don't have access to this information or just have a lot of barriers to really understand it and see it and find it and navigate it, right? Because even myself, like, reading through that stuff is hard to understand. Like, it's worded very strangely. It's jargon that you have to like be a part of that world to really understand it, right? So yeah, just realizing that folks did not know their rights and employers were taking advantage. Employers were forcing workers to like use their personal time if they had it, instead of using like the COVID set aside hours and things like that, just because they didn't want to pay more than they had to, kind of thing. And in the ag community, it's been so much whining, especially like with growers. Like the farms are like the biggest whiners about, oh, we're small farms, like we can't afford to pay this and that. And we're talking about like the lives of the workers, right? Like they're humans who have the right to basic protections. Like honor that and value that. Your farms have insurance. These workers don't. Some of them don't, right? Um, so yeah, there was just a lot of that going on, like people not knowing their rights, and then for folks that were starting, like employers that were starting to implement different practices to protect the workers, just weren't explaining why, right? And so like I think people were pushing back, right, on, oh, why do we have to wear masks all the time and this and that, and maybe just not providing the right conversations with workers to help them feel part of the process and understanding why these things are being done to protect them, right? And meeting them halfway, right? Like if you really are struggling with your mask, you're getting used to it, take breaks as needed, right? Encourage breaks as people get accustomed to it. But if you're just all of a sudden putting in these new rules, not explaining why, and then not being tolerant of like the needs that people have to adapt to new changes, right? Then yeah, you're gonna have a lot of upset people, and people that are more likely to break the rules, right? Because they just don't get it, right? And so yeah, I just heard a lot of angry people, scared people, confused people. um, a lot of people in the factories got sick. Like here we have a lot of potato plants, right? And they were getting like, because of the settings that they work in, right? Like they were um, infecting one another, and just there was I feel like there was lack of accountability or responsibility. Like the employers didn't want to accept that it was because of the workplace, right? I remember when my grandma got sick, I got a call from HR wanting to trace it, right? Like, who was she last around? How do you think she got it? And I was like, you're really asking me that? I was like, she got it at your work site. And like the response to that was just like, you could sense the discomfort the person had. And I was just like, hello, like where else? um, so yeah, it's been, employers just don't want to have to pay more than they need to. I think they're already struggling as is. I don't even know if they're struggling. They're just greedy.
Yeah, I think particularly in this area, there are a few corporation-run food processing plants that
Mhm.
I think, like reflecting nationwide things,
Yeah.
had to go through those certain periods of, we're shutting down for 2 weeks because we have so many of our workers sick.
Yeah.
But so we've talked a little bit about where you work
Mhm.
in that organization. Can you give us a little bit more information? Just like maybe like specific events that you sponsored, like where you're working. You mentioned we're a border town, so
Mhm.
it's not necessarily just Umatilla County, right? It's also Eastern Washington, which is also very ag-based.
Yeah. So at the United Farm Workers Foundation, like I said, our team got hired to provide relief for our communities because that was being impacted by the pandemic. So right off the bat, like the first week that we started, end of August, we had vaccination events in collaboration with the union, the United Farm Workers, and we started in the Yakima Valley, and like each day we were in a different rural community that was heavily ag worker um, based, and we gave, like I said, we managed to give over 90,000 masks in 4 months. And so, like I said, I mean, that week, that was the extreme. I think we did at least five, it might have been more, at least 5 events back to back. And we were there during the times that farm workers are off of work. We would post up with our eagle canopies and flags, trying to get as much attention. We did a lot of social media outreach to tell workers to come and get some supplies. We have hand sanitizer, we have masks, we have information about COVID. We also did some collaborations, like here in Oregon, we did collaborations with the Oregon Health Authority to do testing. And so we were helping promote that and just giving information about the testing available. We also provided cash assistance for folks. They can apply for like a $500 prepaid card, get some money that way. I think over 10,000 were provided in the state of Washington and only like 500 in Oregon. And then what else have we done for the pandemic? Oh, just providing like ongoing informative sessions online, right? About like talk with the doctor, get your questions asked to the doctor. And again, making sure they're like Spanish speakers and stuff like that. And just doing it like Facebook Live, right? We've discovered that farm workers lean towards Facebook. That's like the #1 social media platform. So making sure to utilize that versus like doing like a webinar on Zoom, right? Like just being able to open Facebook and it just immediately starts playing helps people just participate in that way. So those are some of the main things we kind of did. And we were also doing like surveying like over the phone just to understand people's attitudes towards COVID so we can understand where we needed to provide information, right? So, right away we started understanding that there was just a lot of misinformation. So what do? We hosted a Facebook Live to address the misinformation and like get facts from a Spanish speaking doctor. And then we made sure that like the material that we were giving out when we'd go canvas to like the fields or the community spots, we made sure to make flyers that address those things, but in like a positive way, instead of just repeating the myths, providing the information just like a positive way, like, oh, the vaccine doesn't create or cause infertility. Like, that's just an example. But yeah, just getting out there, talking to farm workers, normalizing that this is what we're dealing with. And here's where you can go to figure it out, whether you need a test or whether you need a vaccine. We got you.
Yeah. And just speaking about like these accommodations. So you're talking about meeting with farm workers at a time that works for them. So does that mean that you're not working a typical, like 9 to 5 and my end day's there,
Sometimes I miss that. No, we work a lot. Right now, farm workers, we tend to talk to them in the evenings because the morning is just way too early, right? And sometimes we can find them during breaks and stuff. But yeah, a lot of meetings in the evenings, and just taking calls in the evenings, getting back to workers at those times. But yeah, not a 9 to 5 job, but it's been hard because a lot of people still are operating. Like the folks that we need to contact to get the stuff we need is 9 to 5. So sometimes we're working like way longer days just to make sure we get the information we need to then provide it for the farm workers we're serving. So it's just been the nature of the beast. And, we find times to just chill and recharge. But yeah, it's interesting how much more exhausting working during the pandemic has been. Even if you are chilling, right? Like it's just not the same because all of the different things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. And this can be sensitive information, so I just want to give you a heads up on that. But do you think that the pandemic and all the different responses, do you think like there are any like new worries for you or for like the community when it comes to like documentation status? What has changed?
Well, I think right now, right, just because people are getting laid off, because people are just struggling to financially support themselves even more now than they already were. there is more concerns about their legal status, right? And like just not being eligible for these things. I think being left out is like even more in their face right now, right? And then there are places that do ask, even if they're not supposed to, are asking for people to provide like ID and stuff like that, insurance, and they're intimidation factors, right? People are doing that intentionally. And so I think that right now, yeah, I think worker or people in general who are undocumented are even more probably alone and afraid than the rest of us, right? Like we all feel that way, but even more now.
Yeah. And kind of in speaking about like the financial impact as well. We do live in a rural area where the cost of living is not necessarily as high as it would be in a big city, but I think we are still seeing some pretty big impacts. What do you think have been some like implementations, specifically from Governor Brown or the Oregon Congress, in protecting people to like keep their homes, to be able to stay where they're renting, to just feel a little bit more security?
Yeah, I mean, there have been, again, like I'm not an expert on it because honestly, I have the privilege of not being impacted in that way. So I can't share my own lived experience. But I know that there have been like moratoriums, right, that were implemented. I don't know for how long or what, honestly. But hearing that was happening was a relief. But again, there was people who were constantly like calling and looking for assistance, right? Like I'm calling because I want to know where I can apply to get rental assistance or energy assistance. And again, like these folks were calling us like community-based organizations because again, like we're trusted, but we weren't the ones providing those services, right? So we had to help navigate and find those things. And so again, like sometimes they create the things, the rules, the opportunities, but folks still just don't know how or where to access it. And so it just shows that people aren't getting it.
Yeah. We've had a great conversation, and that about wraps up the questions that I have for you. But is there anything that you would like to talk about that I maybe hadn't asked about?
I don't know. We've talked about a lot, and it's the topic is just continuously evolving, right? Like I guess right now I would just like to add that I'm curious to see like how this year will play out, right? I think the community is feeling confident that we're getting vaccinated more and more every day, but more variants are like sprouting every day too. So that's kind of scary too. Like I was kind of feeling relieved to be vaccinated, right? But it's scary to think about the folks that are starting to live as if this is resolved already and thinking like they're immune just because they have the vaccine. Like I'm scared that we're gonna go through like an uglier last year, right? So I'm scared. I'm still scared, and I don't know what the rest of the year is gonna look like. I hope things get better, but I don't feel so much on the positive side right now as I'd like to be, right? So yeah, I'm just curious as to what will happen, and I hope that our government does a better job of making sure that more vulnerable communities are protected, because right now, the way it's been going, we're just disproportionately impacted, and it's scary to like imagine the world with like less and less of our community, right? So that's depressing. I shouldn't have ended on such a depressing note, but it's the reality that we're in.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to get to speak to you and learn more about just like the community organizing that's been going on during this time. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can just stop it and then I think we're good.
Oh God, where's my mouse at?